Welcome to In Focus, Maine. I'm Bree Driscoll. March is Women's History Month, and to celebrate, we've traveled here to the state capitol to meet with Senate President Mattie Daughtry. She's the youngest woman to ever hold the post. Daughtry comes from a politically active family, but in 2012, at just 25 years old, she was first elected to office. Was this always your dream to get into politics?
Actually, no. I grew up with a family that was definitely active. We volunteered for all different things. You know, I had folks in my family who were active in politics, but I actually was an art major in college. I wanted to be an art teacher. I never really thought that my life would bring me into this room or into this office. And I still sort of look back and I'm like, wow, how did this happen?
Well,
but
what
it's
changed?
one of the best things. Many things. So one, I graduated in 2009, which was, not the best time for a college graduate looking for a job. And like a lot of young Mainers, I was working 3 to 4 jobs to be able to afford to stay in my beloved home state. And then when I was 25, a man who was in the seat that I was living in resigned. And it was an open election, and I realized how angry I was. As funny as that is to say, I realized that a lot of the decisions were being made were hurting my generation and not making it possible for folks like myself to be able to stay and live in my hometown or my home state. And so I was really angry, wanted to make a difference, and I ran for office. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life.
Doing my research for this interview, I spoke with your former babysitter who said that growing up, though, you were involved in a politically active family. Yeah. And when you were very young, you used to watch the election results come in. Was that inspiring for you?
Absolutely. Actually, one of the stories that's been told is there was a local headquarters and I was watching everyone run around, and it was during, I think, the Clinton election. So I was very, very little. And so I actually made my own campaign signs and went out and campaigned with them. I think it said MD4 Prez, probably spelled with a Z, and tried my own campaign, which didn't really go so well, but
But you had that drive.
Yeah, I definitely had the drive
make change.
One of the most fun things about local elections is there's these things that come, you get to read the results, and one year I was there and nobody had their glasses and I was the youngest person, and so they asked me to read the results, and it became this fun tradition. And this was before I even ran for office, so now we all, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, or you're running for school board, or you're running for the legislature, we all take a big selfie together on election night.
Oh, that's amazing. And it's great to see unity like that, which is so much of your job, is bringing people together to kind of pass legislation. Do you find that is difficult to do in these times, or do you think that unity is something that you can help achieve?
I think the decency and civility with which you treat each other is something that we need to all strive for, whether you're dealing with the legislature or whatever your line of work is. I think the hard thing is, in such boiling over political rancorous times, when we get together and when we work well together, it doesn't really make the headlines. And one of the things I'm the most proud of is being Senate President and being in this office is that I was elected unanimously by the Senate. One vote was cast for me to be in this position. I was nominated by a Democrat and by a Republican, and the minority leader even stood up and said comments. And I really take that charge very seriously. And so it means even if I don't agree with someone, I have to find a way that even when we have our swords out, that we can put them down and still break bread at the end of the day.
You wear a lot of hats. Besides being the president of the Senate, you also own a media company. You also co-own a brewery. Mm-hmm. Does being a business owner change how you are a lawmaker?
I think being a small business owner has been absolutely crucial for how I approach my legislation, because one, is someone who's had to work 2, 3, 4 jobs to be able to make ends meet, and living paycheck to paycheck. That's a big thing that informs my work, but also being in charge of other people's paychecks and having to make sure that they're able to maintain their livelihoods really helps me look at a bill in a very different way.
Let's talk about jobs and the economy. Mm-hmm. The price of just about everything is up right now. We're also looking at new tariffs on the federal level. What can you do as a legislator to try to alleviate that stress?
The best thing we can do as state government is create a stable foundation for people to thrive. Whether that's an individual or a small business, they need to know that they can rely on us to be able to support them in their endeavors. We can't necessarily create jobs, but we can create the environment for those jobs to flourish. One of the things I'm actually working on this session is actually a tax bill that looks at what the everyday cost is for Mainers and how we can maybe find them some savings, whether it's at the grocery store, whether it's at the pharmacy counter, or whether it's with their property taxes. And another issue that I'm really passionate about when you're looking at high inflation and what the cost is, Maine needs to be known as a place where you can really bring folks who be here and you can really raise and bring up an incredible family. And so I have a childcare bill, and I'm also looking at increasing the childcare tax credit so that folks are really able to find meaningful care for their family.
In 2022, the Maine Community Action Partnership released a survey asking Mainers what their top issues were. Among them was the housing shortage. What can the legislature do to kind of alleviate this housing shortage?
So one of the things,
especially affordable housing.
Yeah, and all types of housing stock as well. We can't just look at one model of housing and think it's going to solve the problem. On day one, Speaker Fecteau and I actually created the first joint standing committee with housing as one of its major charges to really show how seriously we're taking this problem. We also paired it with economic development to make sure that we are looking at housing and how it's tied to not only longevity, your ability to age in place in the state, but also start your career and what it's like for our workforce as well. We have already invested a historic amount of money into making sure that we're looking at not only rural housing, but apartments, single family homes, senior homes. But we have a lot to do to make sure that you sort of have a continuum when you're looking at affordable housing. How do you make sure that folks have the sort of regulatory environment where they can create large projects, where they can look at smaller projects that they're fitting the need of their local municipalities? How do we also make sure that we have the people available to build those houses? We are losing folks in the trades all the time, so we're investing in making sure that we have people available to, frame things, plumb things, do the electricity. And the other thing that we've been working really hard on is trying to break down silos and find collaboration when it comes to regional housing. Where are the jobs? Where's the infrastructure? How do we make sure that we're looking at housing where transportation makes sense? So we're really trying to take a high level view to get at this crisis from many different angles.
When you look around, you see so many men portrayed in the portraits, but we do have Margaret Chase Smith here. Who are your political leaders that you look up to?
So I think one of the things that I really hold dear is I got into this building when I was 25. And I like to sort of joke I grew up here, and there's been so many women, Democrats, Republicans, who have helped me along my way, and that they lifted me up. And so what I try to do in my position now is make sure that other women know that they can come along.
My one-on-one interview with State Senate President Mattie Daughtry continues after the break. You were telling me when you moved into this office, you found out that this fireplace has an interesting history.
So yes, this whole office actually used to belong to the governor's office. And so there's even things like scratches on one of the doors from Governor Baxter's dogs. But we found out there's an amazing picture of, I think it's Governor Milliken, with a group of Maine women as he's ratifying and signing into law the right for Maine women to vote. And so for me, I wanted to make sure that this fireplace was featured and shown off when people come into the office. And it's just sort of a good reminder when I'm having a rough day or something's going on, I get to just sort of look at it and think about that historic moment.
Welcome back to In Focus, Maine. We've moved here now to the Senate chamber where President Daughtry presides. We continue our conversation now on the issues impacting Mainers the most. Another issue impacting the workforce in Maine is childcare. What can the legislature do to try to add more childcare options?
So we have some great bills on the books, but we need to not only support them, but increase them and look where the real needs are to increase them as well. So we have a bill and a program that gives a subsidy to parents for childcare. We also have one that gets at the salary for childcare workers. Early childhood professionals are some of our lowest paid individuals in the education pipeline. And we also have one that deals with those professionals being able to get childcare for themselves. Because we heard one of the things loud and clear is that folks who are working in our childcare system oftentimes can't afford childcare themselves.
Another big topic last election cycle was crime. Looking back on the heels of the Lewiston shooting, what changes have really been made when it comes to gun legislation?
So Maine last session passed some significant and historic pieces of legislation aiming to ensure that Maine continues to be one of the safest states in the nation. Whether that was looking at our resiliency centers, whether it was a 72-hour waiting period or universal background checks, we had a full portfolio of bills that were looking to not just address what happened in Lewiston, but where we can learn from law enforcement and what we can do to ensure that Mainers are safe.
Access to affordable health care has been a major priority for the governor. She's pushing for increased spending on Maine Care to get more people signed up for insurance. Is there anything being done to address the high costs of health care?
So we were able to expand access to healthcare many years ago with LD1. We also passed it at the ballot box when Mainers said overwhelmingly that we believe that Mainers should have access to quality healthcare. So there's a whole host of bills that this year are coming from all different senators and members. We have things looking at creating a new universal healthcare program, looking at what the costs are, that when you go in for a service, you should be able to know exactly what an MRI was going to be. We have a lot of bills looking at prescription drug costs. That's something that Maine's really been leading the nation on trying to find cost savings. And we also have bills that work with our healthcare centers, so our ones that are on the front line of providing healthcare to our most low-income individuals. We have bills not only supporting them on getting doctors to those areas, but also how they're able to access savings from federal programs like 340B as well.
In terms of the costs of healthcare, it sounds like you're saying that transparency is really important when it comes to these bills that people are getting. What sorts of things are you paying what for?
Exactly. When you're paying for insurance and when you're walking to the doctor, you know, there's very few other places that you walk in and you don't know what something's going to cost. And people shouldn't have to decide between taking care of themselves or their loved ones and financial disaster. So one of the reasons I actually first ran for office when I talked about being angry, it was because I was struggling to afford health insurance. There was a whole host of other things that I was really angry about as well. But for me, I was looking at a $500 on up a month bill. And you know, add that into my student debt as well as my rent and my other living expenses. It was near impossible.
That's the first thing to go, you know.
Exactly.
People are not gonna get insurance if they have to pay for a place to live and food to eat first.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to choose between your own well-being and your family's well-being. You know, that if you're not healthy, you're not gonna be able to work, you're not gonna be able to live your life.
Let's talk about mental health services too, on top of that. What's being done to increase those services and access to those services?
So as part of our last legislature, we created the resiliency centers where folks can really go when they're in a moment of crisis, but we still have a lot of work to do. We have folks who are in a mental health crisis who are waiting to be able to get a place. Many of them are staying in the ER when they should really be able to be in a treatment center. So we have bills examining what's causing that delay, what we can do to invest in our infrastructure. And one area that I'm particularly really interested in is in our students and what we can do to make sure that their mental health is being supported. Especially after the pandemic, we've seen a real decline in all ages mental health, but what can we do to support our students so they're really able to feel their best and be able to learn?
Following up on that, you just introduced some legislation having to do with education and student start times. Tell me about that.
So this is something I started working on in high school, proof that sometimes things take a little bit of time. But the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics have clear science that show that high schoolers should not be starting school before 8:30 a.m. in the morning. This is because the circadian clock for teenagers is different than any of the rest of us. And waking up, you know, at these early hours for, you know, a 6:30, 7:30, 7:55 start time is akin to shaking us up as adults at 3 in the morning. Sleep deprivation leads to decreased testing score, risky behavior, depression, anxiety. And in states and school districts where they've made this shift to this medical recommended time of 8:30 a.m., they've seen increased test scores, they've seen increased student happiness levels. We've seen it passed in Florida, in California, and in many local districts. And so it was exciting to be there today and hear from the students as well who are really passionate about making this change.
After the break, we focus on the environment and what's being done to increase the state's storm preparedness. Stay with us. You've really been instrumental in expanding paid family leave.
Yeah.
Why is this so important to you?
So for me, I introduced the bill after I'd seen a close extended family member pass away from terminal cancer and what it meant for her to be able to have her loved ones with her at the end. And then, it's something that I've grown up with, and I've seen what it's like to be out of work because of a medical issue. And now as someone who wants to start my own family and is really struggling with how financially I could have children, I've seen what it means to me personally. But more importantly,
for some people to have to make that choice, do I stay home with my child a little longer, or do I put food on the table? It really shouldn't be a choice for people to have to make.
Exactly, and I think it sort of actually ties into a little bit about why I'm so passionate about Late Start. We should be doing everything we can to support our children. That means making sure when they're born, they have that quality bonding time with their parents, that they have the best impact. Those 12 weeks are some of the most important weeks of your life, and we need to do everything we can to support them from that moment to the moment they go into their career.
Welcome back. More of my interview now with Senate President Daughtry.
I stand before you today to present LD1, an act to increase storm preparedness for Maine's communities, homes, and infrastructure.
We also saw you introduce a bill for storm preparedness. One of the things that you said that stuck out to me is prepare so you don't have to repair. What are your goals with that?
So we have many different things throughout state government that are funds for when the worst happens. And what we've seen as we've had devastating storms, including almost a year ago, we had 2 storms in a row that devastated our coast, our western areas with flooding through our rivers, is that we had a real lack of resiliency built in. Whether it was our working waterfront that got swept away or individual homeowners dealing with, flooding, their roofs going, windows being broken. We need to do everything we can as Mainers to take care of our state and ensure as these storms are happening again and again and again that we're ready to not only face them, but hopefully bounce back from them a lot faster. And it's not just storms and rain and wind. We also are dealing with droughts that have caused historic devastation. In northern Maine, our snow recreation, last year a lot of it was canceled because we weren't able to have enough snow. And so these bills are looking at making sure that we are ready for the worst, but hoping for the best.
The governor is also hoping to extend the state's free community college initiative. She had asked for additional funding. She says the program will help address workforce shortages. What's the likelihood that a program like this can be permanently funded?
I'm hoping we're able to move forward with this because this is one of the things that I'm really excited that Maine has taken on. I think it prepares Mainers to be able to really enter the workforce without being burdened by student debt. And I think we need to make sure that all types of educational post-secondary opportunities are available for Mainers, whether it's post-secondary or apprenticeships. But this free community college is a good sort of initial foray for students to be able to look at what their post-secondary career looks like. So I'm hopeful that my colleagues will join us in supporting this program because I've spoken to students who've actually gone through it, and many of them said they never thought they'd be able to go to college. They didn't think it was going to be in their future, but specifically because of this program, they were able to get their degree.
It sounds like in so many of the initiatives you have, supporting students is so important to you.
Absolutely.
Why is that?
I think part of it is because I grew up in a long line of educators. I'm one of the first women in my mom's side of the family to not be a teacher. I kind of always hoped I'd be a teacher, but couldn't afford to go through the certification. I think that's part of it, and seeing that public service and that commitment. But also being a younger legislator, when I got into this building, I was only a year away from having been a student. So I think a lot of my bills I initially started working on were coming from my own lived experience. But I also think in the oldest state in the nation, we need to be doing everything we can for young Mainers. I grew up hearing about the brain drain, that you couldn't have a future here, that you couldn't be a young person in Maine. And I hope my life story has proven a little bit, and my friends as well, that we found a way to carve our sort of own experience into this. So if I, in this position, in this office, and with my own sort of, big, bully pulpit or sort of like bullhorn, can pave the way to make sure that more young Mainers are able to stay and craft their lives here, then I know I'll done what I hoped to do when I ran for office.
Maine has such a rich history of really strong female leaders. Yeah. When you look back at history, who has inspired you and who continues to inspire you?
For me personally, I'd say, my mom has inspired me a lot with her own activism and always encouraging me to be able to serve my community. The woman who was kind of like my second mom who helped raise me, Charlene Rydell, she was actually a legislator in the State House, so my first time ever here was actually being her page in the House. And I still remember like the outfit I wore and all the magic of that day. And then also a lot of the women I've served with. I got into this building when I was 25, I was still new, and I met all these incredible women who made sure that I belonged.
What advice would you give to not only young women, but any woman who wants to become a lawmaker or get into politics? What advice would you have for them?
Just do it. If there's an issue you're passionate about or a change you want to see happen, you should run for office. It said that women have to be asked 7 times to run for office, so hopefully if you're watching this piece, I'm asking you to run, so now you only have to be asked 6 more times. But there's so much to be offered through everyone's lived experience. And I thought I had to be a lawyer, I thought I had to be, a certain age, I thought I had to look a certain way or be a certain way. I didn't think I could be a legislator with an art major. And I was so wrong. Politics and government are made so much richer by having people with a diverse lived experience. So whatever the bill is, if someone's passionate, no matter where they're from, what their political party is, I hope women out there will consider running for office.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. For more stories in your community, click the subscribe button here. You can also download the Spectrum News app or watch us on TV for the latest information, balanced coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.